All right, are we online? I think we're online. Yep. Let's see if I can get some people into the chat. All right, we got one person in the chat. Who's in the chat? Who's watching? All right, well, for whoever's out there listening, I'm just here to log some more Twitch hours so I can get qualified as an affiliate and then start uploading some of the audiobooks and stuff onto Twitch. So, yeah, and honestly, as long as there's 3 people sitting here watching, it counts. And otherwise, people have questions or just want to chat, whatever. Yes, exactly. We appreciate the help in becoming an affiliate. Hello to the Anime Tanky. Hello. Nora Borealis, here to help you get affiliate. That's what it's all about today. Mikey makes mistakes. Trans rights are indeed human rights. Yeah. I don't know, excuse me, honestly, why that's such a hard issue. I mean, yeah, it's, maybe just a topic outside the norm for a lot of people. Maybe, especially older people, didn't necessarily grow up with it because, I mean, the trans community was like a lot more underground, in previous decades. But it's not that hard to just kind of get over it. Like, we're all people. So, not really sure. And it's a wedge issue anyway. It's one of the things that conservatives will just dig into to like try to create division because that's kind of how they hang on. It's a technique of reaction to just find whatever issue they can like gin up some kind of division around. Yeah, so that it's scapegoating and all that kind of stuff. It's how they hang on to power. Keep people from realizing our common material interests. Mikey says, even when I was what I think of now as transphobic, I was like, but why do we care if transphobic description of transition? Yeah, yeah, I know. I mean, it's like, yeah, whatever, whether it's something you would want to do or not, that's not really the issue, like at all. It's just like, who's it hurting? Like, why do we care? And I remember having that conversation with somebody who, I used to do some kind of activist things, anti-war stuff with, and then they kind of went more conservative and were like, saying a bunch of transphobic stuff, and I'm like, yeah, but like, why do you actually care? Like, like, how does that actually bother you in any way at all? And they really didn't have an answer. So I think that's generally the case. Generally the case. So, I mean, there's been a lot of progress in the U.S. for just, I mean, public opinion about homosexuality in general, used to be a lot more frowned upon publicly, and public opinion is coming around. I mean, it shouldn't have taken this long, and with better public policy and actual political leadership, I think public opinion would have come around a lot sooner on that. But it is coming around, and people are just realizing, like, okay, same-sex couples exist. The world does not come to a stop. And especially in the post 2008 environment, it's like hopefully I think, and I think it is true. People are just seeing, trans people really aren't the problem. Like global economic meltdown is the problem. So, A.S. Davis, hey bud, hey to you too. We're just hanging out. We got 8 people in the chat, and I am here to log some hours towards the affiliate program and just kind of hang out. I'm done for the week making videos. It's going to be more of an audiobook week next week, and I did a lot of current events stuff in the last few days, and I have made a ton this week, Nora. Yeah. And I like doing that because it's good for the channel, it's good for the numbers, it's good information, it's good for me to, this stuff. I mean, I read a lot of news. That's part of the part of the reason I did the channel in the first place. Is like, I read the news. If I'm not kind of processing it, shit builds up on me. So it's good for me to get it out there. I have a lot of thoughts, as anybody who listens to the channel knows. I can give my thoughts all day on stuff. Well, actually not all day, but but you know what I'm saying. I engage with the stuff, so I like making the videos. That way it's not just building up on me. But there's other stuff going on in life, so like I said, probably won't see any videos uploaded for a few days, and then I'll be getting back on the audiobook track. Probably will do a COVID update, but more of a audiobook week. Hey, Dan. And A.S. Davis, giving myself rage for us, the community. Glad you're doing it. I've learned a lot. It is true. I mean, it takes a lot out of me sometimes. It's I've been pretty high strung this week, especially covering. It's not a lot of fun talking about fascism, but we really have to do it because we're staring it straight in the face. So, yeah, I mean, it has an emotional toll. That's why we'll take breaks of several days at a time every once in a while. But no, the reason, as you say, you've learned a lot. I hear that from a lot of people. I've learned a lot doing the channel too. And if one of my talents is helping to coordinate some education and learning and discourse, then I would like to do that, because I'm I probably got a decade on a lot of the people in the audience. So I've been doing this a little longer. When I was getting out there in the activist world, in the 2000s, 15 years ago, there just wasn't anything like this. Unless you were in an org. I mean, it was really social media really didn't exist at that point. MySpace and Facebook started coming around closer to 2010. And even then, people weren't really using it for political stuff. So I think, just taking advantage of this as much as possible now to save all the upcoming people time. And, I say upcoming people, it's not necessarily just young people, because, I think about 5 or 10% of the audience is over 65 in the, it's people can go their whole life, questioning capitalism, but never really finding a point of entry into getting inside of the resistance of it. And, I think the more accessible we can make it, the better. So, I mean, we started out talking about, how I kind of, give myself rage for the community, or how it can be emotionally taxing. By the end of talking about that, I'd completely forgotten about that part. So, I mean, it is that motivates me to do this. So, Consent Van says, running food to the camps, but I'll have you on my headphones. First chance I've had to catch the stream. Well, it's only the second stream, so, you haven't missed too much so far. What food to the camps, by the way? Dan says, might be doing a live stream himself later tonight with a friend. First time going live in a long time. Cool. Yeah, I saw that you had the channel and were doing a few videos last year, so discussing the Russia versus Ukraine and U.S. So, yeah, as you may have seen on the channel, I put up that little clip of Biden talking about Afghanistan, but he's we were never going to unite Ukraine. I mean Iraq. I mean Afghanistan. It's all the same to them. Their plan is invade some, quote, smaller defenseless country, and then make complete chaos in that country, just violently destroy the country. And it's all the same to them. And so, you want to know how Ukraine would end up if the U.S. started war there? Look at Iraq. That's probably what it would end up like. Nora says, as someone who feels late getting into it in her early 30s, it makes me very glad people are getting into it in their 60s. Yeah, I mean, even me, like, I got exposed to Marx when I was a teenager, and I felt, read the manifesto and, like, some of the other basic stuff, some history of the Russian Revolution and things like that. And I felt like I was generally on the same page, but it never got reinforced in any other area of my life. So, it wound up drifting away, and I got involved with what was in front of me, which wasn't really Marxist. Actually, my first exposure to real life Marxism of any stripe was the ISO, Trotskyist group, and I swear to God, it turned me off to socialism for like years. Just the way that they did things, the little student newspaper cult, it was, yeah. So, in other words, I got exposed, then kind of turned off to, like, the socialism that was around me. And then I kind of came back to it later, kind of post Occupy, started, like, digging in and getting a lot more serious, because I was like, well, the libertarians are now organized, and I realized that those are crypto-fascists, and I don't want anything to do with them. And we didn't succeed as the anti-war movement. We need to do something else. Now we're in this, post-2008 zone. So for me in the 2010s, I started getting a lot more serious about, like, what is the history here of, anti-capitalism? How do we actually get into that? And, overcoming the Cold War propaganda and all that stuff. So you are definitely not alone in that. We are, in the U.S. left generally, for the first time in like a couple of generations, starting to find our footing again. There's going to be some bumps along the road. I think as long as we just, keep moving forward as quickly as possible, we will get there, and we'll get there pretty soon. So, Consent Van says, food not bombs plus stop the sweep supplies. Awesome. I one time saw, this was years ago, one of the Food Not Bombs organized, like co-founders or something, speaking about how much they had been harassed, like trying to give free food to people. Man, capitalism does not like that. Like that's how they keep you working. So, and I remember him saying something like, they got stopped at an airport because they're like, we heard that you're involved with the violent group Food Not Bombs. And the guy was like, no, it's in the name, food, not bombs. We're not violent. So anyway. Crazy fucking country. RNFM says USC's entire world is their backyard. Biden, he is too senile to hide it. Yeah. I mean, people would talk about how Obama was kind of that perfect, friendly, smiling face of friendly fascism. And it did really put the left to sleep, at least for his first term. And then, Trump kind of ripped the mask off. Biden, in a way, I don't really see the left going back to sleep. So, to me, Biden's about on the level. Biden's kind of like if you took Bush and Cheney and rolled them into one person and then made him really old with some, failing faculties. He's not appealing at all. And Kamala, I was looking at some article, like apparently Kamala hates being vice president. That was at least what the article was saying. That's why you never see her anywhere. So they're not doing great PR. Biden's approval rating has just been dropping and dropping. It's been roughly around 40% approval for the last month or two. But if you go to Real Clear Politics and they have an average of 10 different polls, because if you look at the Rasmussen poll, it's basically Republican propaganda. It's skewed way to the right. If you look at Quinnipiac, that leans very progressive. So you'll get some anti-establishment Dems, but it's also going to overweight Bernie or something like that. But anyway, they do an average, and the average is not good. So yeah, Biden, not a popular figure, not really good PR for the empire. Plus, he doesn't even have the cult of personality of a Hillary Clinton, where you're going to get all these weirdos like, 6 years later still tweeting, I'm still with her, and the fanaticism. So Biden really doesn't have anything going for him at all. That was a pretty desperate move on the part of the empire. I think they just didn't go with like Buttigieg or Klobuchar, because they had even less to bring to the table, and they probably would have gotten destroyed. Plus Klobuchar, whatever it was, something she didn't know who the leader of Mexico was or something. Which, yeah. Democrats, what can you do? Mikey says, I've always hated capitalism, at least in theory. I didn't start looking into viable options until Bernie and Moore. AOC, because I'm biased in favor of Latinas. So, yeah, I mean, doing S4A, I started S4A, I mean, I've done other things in the past, but I started S4A as a Facebook page in 2019. And, we did shit posting and memes, and I was like, I kind of like to do book reviews or like some kind of more long-form, in-depth content versus just that. But it was good timing as far as the 2019-2020 primaries. I was able to get a lot of momentum going from that. And started the YouTube channel in February 2020. So when Bernie was still in the primaries, there's still a lot of momentum to the whole thing and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of just in the right place at the right time as far as starting it. So, yeah, but I mean, as far as people getting into actual socialism through Bernie, yeah, I spoke with a lot of people who were like, maybe they had done Occupy, maybe they had supported Bernie in 2015, 2016, and then realizing that, that just really wasn't working, it wasn't following through. They started looking around at more radical history. And so you're not alone with that at all. I think that the thing now is people just need to realize that, that's a dead end. The direction that Bernie took things in is a dead end. The Democratic Party, they might correctly point out that like, oh, the Republicans are far right and all that stuff, but they don't do anything about it. So, they could easily crush the Republican Party by adopting popular reforms that the left is trying to hand to them on a platter. But the Democrats won't do that. First of all, they're controlled by the same big bourgeois donors that control the Republican Party. There's a little bit of difference. Like some of them support the Republicans more and some support the Democrats more. But in general, I mean, both parties are controlled by the 1%. That's entirely an accurate statement. Finance capital rules both parties. So, they want the discussion to stay between the Democrats and the Republicans, because if the Democrats actually were to partner with the left and stamp out the Republicans, they could drive them into being a purely regional party in just a few election cycles. Then the Democrats would have to face the left, and you'd probably be looking at the overthrow of capitalism at that point. Obviously, the backers of the Dems do not want that. So that's why they keep us on the brink of fascism, and whatever observations they make about, how fascist the Republicans are, it's entirely accurate. Problem is they're literally propping them up by, through inaction. So yeah, anyway. Dan says, Jimmy Dore made a video with Richard Wolff about black Canadians supporting the Flu Trucks Klan. And I mean, how many times has Jimmy Dore railed on about, imperialism with more non-white faces? And like, you're literally going to do the same thing with populism. I haven't seen the thing with Richard Wolff. I know he had been too supportive of like the anti-mandate, which is just it's an anti-vax movement. That's what it is. It's the new face of the anti-vax movement is anti-mandate. They found it's a little bit harder to argue with that, so they've taken that tactic. Plus, it makes them sound a little less crazy. But this is basically, it comes down to like the libertarian grift of like government overreach. Like, go fuck yourself, But I didn't know that Wolf had revived this topic. If you want to like DM me the link, I might take a look at that. I'm like kind of beyond the point of wanting to even, not that you were suggesting it, but I'm kind of beyond the point of wanting to comment on Jimmy Dore stuff at this point. I feel like I've kind of made that clear. Plus the Jimmy Dore people are so fucking impenetrably rabid and closed-minded about it. Any attack on him, it's like, forget it. In fact, the last thing I put up got taken down. and I got a strike on the channel. I kind of think that may have been like just Jimmy Dore fans. So yeah, they're wrong, but at the same time, like I just have to pick the forums in which I fuck with that. So anyway, yeah, they are wrong though. I mean the Convoy, it's deeply tied to the People's Party of Canada. Where did the People's Party come from? I put it in that last video I just uploaded yesterday. It is a Conservative Party politician who is involved with law and finance and free market think tanks who co-founded this populist party, which is pushing all kinds of anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim stuff, as you expect from populists. It's usually racist. So yeah, it's crypto-fascist. This is obvious, and Richard Wolff sure as hell should know better than that. Mikey Makes Mistakes says, I was accidentally paraphrasing Marx as a child, like I basically said, from each according to ability to each according to need. Yeah, it's very intuitive. We should not have a system where, for example, if you had a barbecue in your backyard and there was a big spread out on the picnic table and somebody came in with a wheelbarrow and 2 armed guards and loaded up 90% of the food and tried to take it out of your backyard, most of the other people would not stand for that. Like, there's nothing really intuitive about capitalism. It's a system of oppression. So, yeah, and I do think, teach kids young. Like, teach them to hang on to that, Sure, these conservatives, you're brainwashing the youth. Lenin said it's all about if we can control the youth, it will... No. Like, actually, capitalism is what stamps it out of people. It's what teaches you a level of competition, like this toxic competition over basic life essentials that is entirely unnatural and goes against everything that's kind of instinctive in us. A certain amount of competition as a game can, where you're not literally fighting for your life, that can bring out the best, friendly competition where you can actually see, who is best at this and who's best at this and apply your talents accordingly. That's one thing. Capitalism makes you fight to the death, though. So Monkey Gamer from the Moon says, I think Ukraine will be a proxy war, Cold War 2.0. Well, so we saw, people have asked me, do I want to do a video on the Ukraine thing? I don't think that I can do a long-form video on that where I could really add anything to the discussion that isn't already being said. Therefore, I'm concentrating my video production time on just other topics that I think I can, just be more effective at. However, I think my general take is, we saw the uprisings in Kazakhstan, which it seems like neoliberals were trying to hijack and turn it into a color revolution last month. That is a strategically very important country. It has a huge border with Russia, and a lot of the important Belt and Road, New Silk Road stuff from China would be running through Kazakhstan to Europe. And really, really, imperialism does not want that to happen because, it's just like the thing you've heard, about the petrodollar. Like, they need everybody to be hooked into the U.S., dollar-backed, that. It's like every time that a leader thinks about switching away from trading in dollars, they get whacked, the country gets overthrown. China is trying to lay, at least I believe, and this is the stated purpose, and I believe it. China's trying to lay the groundwork of a cooperative global infrastructure where people can finally, in many countries at once, get out of the whole Western imperialist debt trap, debt slavery system. And therefore, it's logical that they would try to prevent that, imperialism would try to prevent that with everything that they can. So you see attempts to disrupt that Russia-China alliance. And so what countries are going to be targeted? Countries that lie along the China and Russia, border zone, that Central Asia area, and that would be major, important routes for the Belt and Road system to go through. So, it's like, and why are they doing that? Because they can't target China directly. They would love to, they formed the Quad. I may do a story on that. just what is the Quad and all that stuff. It's the alliance between the U.S. and Japan. I believe it's U.S., Japan, Australia, and India, although they talk about the framework being kind of loose and just whoever wants to join it can join it. But they cannot go after China directly. So what do? Russia's a lot weaker than China is. So they target Russia and the countries along Russia's border. So I think that that's really all it kind of comes down to. Oitz says, the growth of the American left over the last few years has been really heartening. The state of the U.S. left was dire less than a decade ago. You're absolutely right. Occupy to me was the first kind of putting it back on the map where, hey, we're going to talk about capitalism. Prior to that, it just was not really discussed. I did anti-war activism in the 2000s, and I met socialists, and I met Greens, and I met left liberals and social democrats, and everybody else who was opposed to the war in Iraq and felt that the Bush-Cheney thing was like a far-right switch that, was extremely alarming for a number of reasons. And they're just, the left was still really weak at that time, though. I mean, and then if you go back even beyond that to the 90s, it was kind of a lot of like, there was activism going on, but it just wasn't really on anything like the level that it is now. So anyway, Dan says, who's going to win tomorrow's Super Bowl? And here's how much I follow sports. Oh, is the Super Bowl tomorrow? That's what I got there. I'm not like a big... when I was a kid, I tried following sports, and I don't know. I like some sports more than others. I just didn't really get into watching them, and I got more into like the arts, music, and books and different things. Just athletics. I like to do them. I don't like to watch them so much. I mean, I'll watch them if there's like, if it's the most interesting thing going on, and there's like nothing else to do, I'll watch it, but. Not hugely into sports. Nothing against people who are. It just never entirely captured my attention. I like to play more than I like to watch. So Dan says, plus I have plans to make it to LA this March. I've already put in the vacation time. Good. I hope we're not getting another spike of Omicron is all I'm going to say. And I'm not trying to rain on your parade. I refuse to make plans currently because... I don't trust it. And clearly we're past the point where the ruling class is really interested in having any kind of COVID protections. Incidentally, on the whole trucker convoy thing, people are like, oh, the governments are caving. Look, they're giving in to their demands. Yeah. So actually, I don't know if you know, but Denmark, I think Norway, Sweden, Ireland, England, the U.S., they're all taking down their COVID protections anyway. I don't think that it's so much that they're caving as much as they're literally, we're going to do this anyway. And I would kind of take the convoy more as kind of a threat to people who might think about protesting in favor of keeping the protections. But anyway, the COVID video I'm thinking of doing this week is on BA.2, which is the second Omicron variant. And from what I've read, it's not a descendant of BA.1. Like, it's not like BA.1 was rolling and then it turned into BA.2. It's like a cousin, so they kind of co-evolved simultaneously. BA.1 happened to spread widely first, but BA.2, which has a common point of evolution in the past, but has its own path, it's starting to spread more now. It's been about tripling week to week. The numbers are still low, but they're going up by about threefold week to week. Started at 0.4% prevalence, then 1.2%, then 3.6%, so like exactly tripling week to week. So if that keeps up, next week should be around 11%, then around 33%, then about almost 100%. That would be just in time for March 1st. So I'm real concerned about that. Plus, people, it won't be winter, then you get the whole warm weather spread. So I don't know. I hope that your trip is safe and that nothing gets canceled and that there is not a spike. I am pretty concerned myself, though. And at this point, I put everything on hold, and I'm really freaking pissed about it. So anyway, Nora says, was reading that the majority of Crimean people was to be a part of Russia. This was like a Gallup poll from 2016. It's been hard to find leftist sources from inside Crimea right now. Yeah, it's not something that I'm particularly in touch with. I don't have my finger on that pulse. I don't know. So I just it boggles my mind that the U.S. is so unrelenting in this, and all I can think of is if war does break out, which none of us really want, that it also leads to a wave of revolution. That's all I can really say. When imperialists fight, they get weakened, and that can leave openings for, capitalism gets overthrown where it's weakest. And, in the aftermath of World War I, we saw a revolution and near miss revolution. And after World War II, we saw a lot more revolution. And if there's World War III, I can only assume there would be more revolution. In fact, part of my theory that I've yet to develop, but it's sort of a tentative hypothesis, is that part of the reason for the stagnation in world revolution in the 80s, 90s was there wasn't a World War III. So I don't know. Carthorse 1 says media was promoting Hillary even during the Clinton administration, just like New York Times promoted Clinton in the 80s as Arkansas governor. Yeah, I mean, Hillary was always a major, major name. This was not somebody who, you see people trying to with Michelle Obama, like, oh, she should run for president. Really? I mean, she just wasn't really, she's not like that popular of a figure. Not meaning people don't like her. I just mean Hillary was, conservatives used to joke that Bill and Hillary were like co-presidents. But I mean, really, like, she was out there as that. Michelle Obama never was. So, yeah, I agree. Like, Hillary was always a major figure, even when she, prior to being a senator and all that. Funky Lollipop, screw on with her and with socialism. There you go. We'll start saying that. Mikey makes mistakes. For context, I'm biased in favor of Latinx people because of my native Mexican roots, mixed baby. I was too young for Occupy, but my sister's friends were on TV protesting. Yeah, I mean, it was a good thing. Obviously, mistakes were made, but just, and I think it was about a third of the country, the last poll I saw, supported Occupy, and the rest of the country was like, what's their problem? I was there in Occupy. It was pretty ragtag, but I think important lessons were learned. And then, of course, you see the, a lot of the grievances that were articulated at that time picked up by the Bernie Sanders campaign. Incidentally, it's another reason why we need to form our own party. That way, we don't have to wait for a Bernie Sanders to come along and then roll the dice on, is that person going to feed the shit back into the Democratic Party where it will die. Big Red Boy 1234 says, the only hope for the Dems is if The Rock is their nominee. They're a bourgeois party through and through, so offering material benefits is off the table. Yeah, I mean, kind of, their only hope of staying popular at all is getting, like, celebrity power. They're certainly not running on popular policies. They're running on, we're not the Republicans. And that's clearly where the capitalist class that controls both parties wants the discussion to be, on a razor's edge of a fascist coup. And, I mean, that's not a good situation for the rest of us. Mikey says, I think the best people from DSA, PSL, and CPUSA and others should build a viable party. So along those lines, I did see, I think it was in Louisiana, there was a kind of coalition formed between local DSA, CPUSA, PSL, and FRSO. They had a banner with all their logos on it. It was still not a large group of people. There's maybe like 40 in the picture. Still, it's good to see. I think that we're still at the building stages. I think that we still need to get more people out into orgs and active before we kind of see, that alchemy happening. You want to get, before you start doing the splits, maybe a little bit more of like critical mass going. That way you're not wasting the effort on fights that's only going to impact like 10 people. So I think that people should stay in the orgs and do as much work as they can, unless there's really, really glaring problems where you can't do the work. But stay in there as long as you can. Issues are going to come up that are going to be dividing points for the org. And if it results in a split, just at least make sure that it's not sectarian, that it's truly like, the petty bourgeois, like more right-leaning faction of the party, for example, in a DSA, goes one way, and then there's a significant new Marxist org that comes out of it or something like that. But yeah, we don't want just splitting for splitting's sake. That's kind of what Trots do, and that's how you wind up with as many Fourth Internationals as you have Trotskyist parties almost. So yeah, you don't want like splitting to split. We want to just get out there, do the work, and in that process, identify the people who really, really do want the same things. And same things in a broad sense, not sectarian petty squabbles, but the same things in a broad sense. And I do think as more people get involved, we're going to find that out, and that will happen. People will arrange themselves, along those lines. So was that Occupy in... Oh, that's a reply to somebody else. Mikey said... No, that was the reply. The Anime Tanky says they're almost as toxic as Vosh fans. I'm not sure who you mean, but, Vosh fans are pretty toxic. I'll give you that much. Big Red Boy 1234. True Anon's pod on Ukraine was pretty good. All right. I don't listen to as much media. I spend most of my time either on Twitter, seeing what's going on, getting news. I find it to be a pretty good news source. There are some other shows I listen to once in a while, but usually I'm pretty active when I'm gathering, reading news stories, clicking links. And for me, at least, because I'm trying to synthesize like huge amounts of information, it's hard for me to sit down and just listen to an hour-long or 2-hour show because, my job, I feel like, is to look at many little pieces and then put them into a 1-hour or 2-hour thing. So, going in the reverse direction is kind of difficult for me, but that's good to know. Yeah, I'm sure that there are people, spreading the good word on Ukraine and why war there is not a good idea, but I haven't heard that. Oit says Mark Ames is great. Not familiar. Scanning Darkly says, hey, S4A, really appreciate your work. Can't stick around for long. Spent my afternoon protesting Nazis. It's pretty late over here. Best of luck with everything, and thank you. Well, you're welcome. Thank you for being part of the community and for your support. Thank you for protesting Nazis, because somebody's got to do it. Where was that, by the way? Fred Engel says, there was also a trucker convoy of far-right anti-vaxxers in the Netherlands today. Yeah, so that's actually a parallel that... my brain just gets overwhelmed dealing with this stuff, and I didn't didn't come out of my mouth at any point during the videos. But yeah, like the amount of far-right agitation against the mandates and restrictions in the Netherlands and countries in that area was huge. So I got to think that, the Canadian populists are taking a cue from those kinds of things. We've seen the rise of a lot of far-right stuff in this kind of populist vein, whether it was the pro-Brexit party, was it Nigel Farage in the UK, and that other guy in the Netherlands, his name is escaping me, but big far-right male politician. Yeah, they're trying to transplant it and spread it as far as they can, spread it to Canada. The U.S. obviously is fertile ground, Australia, they'll spread it wherever they can. And it's just, I don't know, very depressing, just astroturfed garbage, watching people fall for it. It's, this conservative white victimhood, you can't tell me what to do. A. Tyler B., something I could probably look up, but how they name these variants makes me curious. Yeah, I couldn't tell you the name. If you look at the naming conventions, it kind of makes sense. I couldn't tell you what the exact rules are, though, off the top of my head. Red Wizard, if anything, she is less popular now. Who, Kamala? I'm way behind on these comments. Yeah, Kamala's numbers have never been good, I don't think, at any point during this. Comrade Charmander, I'm so salty Twitch didn't notify me about the stream. Hey, S4A, hope it isn't about 10. No, I just started about a half an hour ago. I'll probably go at least another half an hour, maybe an hour. We'll see how the chat and the comments go. I'm just here to like log some more time towards affiliate, but I kind of like doing these too. So, unelectable airwave says the neo-colonial period seems to make revolution tougher. I guess because the exploitation is less obvious and it's harder to build consciousness. Yeah, somebody was asking me last time, like, what do I think major ideological developments have been like post Lenin, post Marxism. When Marxism became Marxism Leninism, and then obviously, like a lot of people add like Mao Zedong thought to that. And I said, kind of the national liberation movements that many of which are influenced in some way by Marxism Leninism or like Maoist thought. Oops, can you all hear me? Sorry, I may be offline. I'm trying to figure out if I am or not. I'm monitoring this on the video, and it says this video is unavailable. So let me see. All right, I'm online, Nora says. So I don't know what happened there, but I'm monitoring the Twitch thing, and it just suddenly looked like it crashed. All right, I guess that's not a huge problem. Let me just find where I was in the chat again, so I can keep going there. Oh yeah, excuse me. So the neo-colonial period. Yeah, I mean the whole thing about neo-colonialism is it is basically proxy colonialism using local people in the colonial government. So, like, obviously, if, let's say, you have an African country and it's traditional colonialism and it's like a white government from, some European country, that's pretty obvious. You can identify who's who and then just see who works for them. Neocolonialism is a lot sneakier, and yeah, it's a trickier thing. I think, though, there have been effective movements against it, but this is where, again, like the populism, like these appeals to just race or something like that. And sorry, let me back off of that. I misspoke because I could see somebody getting the wrong idea from that. In an imperialist country, populism among particularly like oh boy, you have to adjust what you say carefully, otherwise some reactionary is going to pick it up. Let me back this up. Sorry, and half of my mind is still on the fact that my tab just crashed. So let me just throw that statement away entirely. Yes, neocolonialism is tough, and particularly when people try to just go by simple standards like, oh, they're a local person, they're one of us. Yeah, but this is where the bottom line is class analysis becomes imperative, because you can't just go, but in some situations maybe you can, where like race and class are much more closely linked. But in a neo-colonial situation, that is less so. Sorry for the stumbling there. Mikey Makes Mistakes says, also on the Crimean Russia versus Ukraine thing, the people already voted overwhelmingly, and they voted Russia, which makes sense. Most of the people there are more Russian culturally. So I can't really comment on that. I'm honestly just not in the loop on that entire subject, so just happens to fall outside of my expertise or even kind of my more general knowledge base. Unelectable airwaves. I think if we were actually concerned about democracy in the region, we'd be helping them have safe referendums instead of national sovereignty. I mean, obviously the U.S. is not interested in democracy at all. What they call democracy is just imperialism. So, Airwave says, I second the TrueAnon recommendation. The Ukraine episodes were great. Okay. Mikey says, I would stream myself if my living situation allowed for it and I wasn't scared of getting bombarded from my audience overlap with Vosh, and to a lesser extent Hassan. What little audience I have likes one or both. Yeah, so I mean, for me, I came into this literally as just somebody who wanted to read some more Marx and Lenin, and like maybe give my takes on it was primarily two things. One, read more Marx and Lenin, and if I was going to read it, why not read it with other people? And number two, I got really, really, really sick of Secular Talk and Humanist Report and TYT and Jimmy Dore being kind of the going thing out there, and I wanted to contribute to the growth of actually socialist alternatives to that. That is really like the impetus of starting up S4A, and anything that it has grown into beyond that at this point is, or that it will, is, icing on the cake and was not originally planned. I mean, the left, like, I didn't know who Vosh was when I started this. I was not into like left YouTube at all. I did not know who that was. And so for me in the first year, I didn't even really know who Caleb Maupin was or what this whole like Nazball thing was about. I mean, I knew what right-wing politics were. I didn't realize that they were actually like pretending to be communists. That was a very strange concept. But you do what you can when you can, pick the battles that you can fight, and just kind of hope that things grow in a timely enough way that you can actually address topics as they come up. But yeah, it sucks. I mean, the Vosh people, you see them on Twitter, they will literally defend that guy saying anything. And then, as far as Hassan, I mean, somebody made a comparison to Joel Osteen. I mean, I think that while preaching any kind of anti-capitalism is better than fundamentalist Christianity, personally, yeah, I mean, buying the Porsche, that's rubbing it in people's faces for sure. And it's one thing for when people are like, oh yeah, well, houses in LA are expensive. Okay, it's $3 million though. And it's like, oh, what do you want him to move away from all his friends in LA? Now you're stretching it. And then he bought a $200,000 sports luxury car. What, he shouldn't have transportation? Like, no, you're done. Like, you've totally lost credibility at that point. All right. Charmander says the amount of people just going along with the idea that Russia is going to invade Ukraine on February 16 after the U.S. lying so many times. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I think that support for U.S. war has gone down, that there is still any... I don't know what to say. I mean, to me, the fact that people still vote Republican... let alone, like Democrat is one thing. You can see people getting a little bit tricked there. I don't know. I think there's a lot of confusion out there. Nora says, re-listen to the Nick Estes from a few months ago as I start the book, Red Nation Rising. Just wanted to say thanks for turning me on to it and give a shout out too, as it's a great essay. Yeah, I learned about Nick Estes and the Red Nation website during the whole PATSOC versus Landback discussion that was happening on social media. So, there was a really good dialectic that was, I think, solved appropriately by the community, identified Fash LARPing as socialists, and brought a lot of good voices to the fore. And that is why that wound up on the channel. So, Geert Wilders, yes, that is the person I was thinking of, the far-right Netherlands politician. Mikey, nope, that was a response to somebody else. Carthorse says, there is a delay from our questions and what we hear, so that's why some of the questions don't make sense to you. Yeah, I get that. I give some long answers sometimes, so. Charmander says, it's a recent thing, U.S. claiming that they have intel that's very specific and exact, very similar to before Iraq. Russia's very firm, saying that they do not want war, but that putting weapons in Ukraine is a red line, akin to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yeah. It's just amazing how these things repeat. Scanning Darkly says, it was in Hungary. The event is called the Day of Honor. It's supposed to commemorate the failed breakthrough of the Nazis to escape the Soviet siege. The Nazis get LARPing and then go for a forest walk along the path where the breakthrough was supposed to happen. If you want to see pictures about it, look for something I can't pronounce. Unfortunately, this time we were outnumbered by the Nazis. We had a great showing in 2020, though. Police were protecting us from them. So this is where the Nazis were being protested against. Well, thank you for doing that. And what's the state of politics in Hungary today? I'm really not up to speed on that. Is the far right strong, or yeah? Dan says good video on the Ukraine. Is Ukraine on fire? Who did that one? Let's see. Mikey says someone told me they think Hassan is a crypto Marxist Leninist. Well, he's hiding it pretty well. Fred Engels, Vausch. Yeah. It's, it's a unique name. It's a unique identifier. He certainly, when somebody says the name, you're not confusing it with anything else, but it's a strange one. Mikey says he also actively rubbed the car in people's face. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's shitty. And, if there's some kind of agitprop function to like that, I wish he would just come out with it already rather than just fucking taking people's money over and over and over again. Yeah, Fred Engels. Hassan has the Dungest grind set, but without the socialism. Yeah, I believe we just call that grifting. Charmander, S4A, what is populism? I've seen this word used a lot, but it doesn't seem to really mean anything. Or I'm just dumb. No, you're not dumb. It's confusing. So populism, if you look at like the 1880s and thereabouts in the United States, there was a populist movement that was kind of against the big banks and stuff, but it wasn't proletarian. The U.S. was much more agrarian at that time. So the populists were like farmers. And, so they weren't like proletarian. So it was a movement of them. I mean, there was one in Russia, too, around that time. And Lenin wrote about it. Obviously as Marxists, our idea is that capitalism moves to socialism and that movement needs to be led by the proletariat. So like in Russia, for example, which was very agrarian at the time of their revolution in 1917, and the couple of decades leading up to that, the idea was that the proletariat needed to make a coalition with other classes, for example, the peasantry, but that the proletarians needed to be the leaders because the peasantry was actually a class on the way out, left over from feudalism, that would become proletarian, and that the proletariat was the future and one of the great classes, that capitalism would turn most of the population into proletarians, and that the proletariat would be the ruling class in the next mode of production, socialism. So the populists are kind of like Marxism existed at that point, Marx and Engels getting going in the 1840s. So this is several decades later. But the populists are people who weren't Marxist, but they were kind of standing up to the financial elites and whatever. The thing is that the further you go along in proletarianization, like the further forward you go in history, capitalism goes along, more and more people are, the class composition shifts. Fewer people are farmers, more people are wage workers. Fewer are peasants, in other words, and more are wage workers. So populism increasingly becomes kind of an anti-Marxist reactionary rallying cry of a class that's on the way out, and then it just becomes kind of hucksters as you get into the 1920s and 30s. It becomes more explicitly anti-socialist, anti-communist. It's people who made a name for themselves opposing the big banks. Like they would be for the silver standard, for example. But it gets because it doesn't have like a solid class basis, it would get tied up with all kinds of racism. So like anti-Jewish racism, anti-black. And again, once Marxism had really established itself, there was just no reason to be populist, and it became more of an identifier of like anti-communism. So that's a brief summary. I mean, there's a lot more that could be said about it, but, there's also a limit to like, what you kind of need on the basic level. But it is confusing because the populists, they will basically use anti-elite rhetoric, but for what? Because as Marxists, we know class conflict is the driving force of history. Okay, well, what class does populism represent? I don't know. What it is increasingly, and I would say like the Libertarian Party is kind of like a crypto populist thing. It's like the petty bourgeoisie, the people, quote unquote, against the big bourgeoisie, although it's really, because of just the nature of capitalism, led around by the big bourgeoisie. And because it can't actually make pro-worker appeals, it has to go in for racism and all kinds of other stuff. So that's what I would say. In a more general sense, populism is any strategy which sort of just appeals directly to the people themselves rather than, a kind of out of touch elite. But really, I mean, this is a term which is now taken on a context and connotation of being anti-proletarian and most frequently hijacked for far-right purposes. So there you go. Airwaves says, in answering the populism question, Airwaves usually thinks of populism like politics blaming a vague establishment or, quote, elites for keeping workers down, so you can appeal to workers' animosity without offering specific solutions. Yeah, it's not really tied to class struggle. It's just you don't really define class struggle as the motive force of history. You don't define the capitalist class, and to some extent, like the petty bourgeoisie, as they aspire to become the big bourgeoisie, as the problem. So you don't really define the activities of capitalism for what they are, and you especially can't then lay the groundwork for a theoretical foundation of understanding the importance of proletarian revolution. You're more likely to just sort of do reforms, or if it goes very far right, you can say we need to get all the insert minority name here out because they're the problem, and we're the real people and they're not, and populism. It's not a good thing. So yeah, kind of is just, I think, like when I say it's anti-communist, it's meant to confuse workers about what is the motive force of history, how do you fix the problems, and what is the source of your economic woes. So yeah. A.S. Davis says, what's my perspective on the failures of Marxist orgs actually engaging the working class? So this is going to vary from country to country. I'll just talk a little bit about what I know about the U.S. That wasn't always the case. I mean, Marxist orgs at one point, particularly prior to World War II, there were more fighting coalitions of, working class and Marxist orgs engaging people. There was a stronger and more militant labor movement that was actually making a difference in people's lives, and that people were willing to fight and in some cases even die for the labor union. So like that, working people actually recognized the class struggle. It was a real thing and not like an abstraction. And organizations would get involved in people's lives, and they would have bowling nights and other kinds of, mutual aid. It was like a part of people's actual lives. So an organization rallying people was just that. It wasn't this abstract thing that you sort of do as a hobby. After World War II, which of course was a grand popular front against the far right, what actually happened in the second half of the 1940s was the left was completely discarded. The left that had basically helped to win World War II in a major way was discarded. The Republicans in the U.S. took control of Congress for one of the only 2-year periods. I think they did again within the next 5 or 6 years. But then the Republicans almost never controlled Congress in the mid-20th century. When they did, though, they passed Taft-Hartley, which basically made every effective thing that a labor union could do in terms of direct action illegal. It severely reduced labor rights and laid the groundwork for gutting all of the labor organizations. So that was a big step towards where we are today. And, you can say that also some of the Marxist orgs were too opportunist in terms of working with the bourgeoisie. There's a lot of factors that go into that. Also, the Comintern was dismantled, I think probably played a role. However, in this environment post-World War II, no Comintern and the onslaught of, things like Taft-Hartley the slave labor bill, as I believe Truman called it. And then you get culturally McCarthyism as not a legal but a civil push, although it overlapped, in some ways legally, push to completely push radicals out of any position of social influence. So as we enter 1950, you have basically the labor unions are legally hamstrung, and in civil society, radicals are looked on with increasing extreme paranoia and scrutiny. So you get a really bad couple of decades, and then the new left emerges, and some of the ties to labor have been severed because labor has been so crippled. Also, the Republicans in the 60s start their Southern strategy, which leaned heavily on promoting racism among the white working class, and you see that go into the 70s, and then we get into neoliberalism. And then at the same time in the international communist movement, you have the Sino-Soviet split. Like a lot of rancor, there's things not going well. The USSR dismantled in the early 90s. So as far as like the failures of Marxist orgs engaging the working class, it's been kind of a terrible time since World War II in many ways. And it's going to vary from org to org, because then you get like the anti-revisionist organizations popping up in the 60s and 70s. That becomes its own thing. And there actually was some successful organizing there, but no revolution. And then, so it's kind of a lot of things, I guess, if there's topics within that, but that would be kind of my overview of it. So in terms of the failures of the orgs, I guess that the answer is, I think it's less of a situation from my perspective of like all the pieces were lined up for a revolution and just the orgs totally fucked up. No, I think it was a extremely hostile environment the entire way, pretty much for like 70 years. So that's not to say that mistakes weren't made by orgs. Like, for example, if you want some criticisms of CPUSA around that time, Harry Haywood, writing about the period in the 40s and 50s, talks about the fight against the right deviations that he saw in CPUSA. I have some stuff up on the channel about that. I mean, obviously, there's a counterpoint to that as well. Some people would say these weren't right deviations at all. Okay, well, it's up for all of us to figure out who's right, I mean, the end results haven't been good. So anyway. Mikey says, populism for populism's sake is scary and dangerous and just becomes fascism. Yeah, I mean, and again, it's, I know what you're saying. It's never really for populism's sake. It's for capitalism's sake, right? Because as they realize that, hey, we need a movement that can divert radical energy, which could be used for revolutionary purposes. We need to divert that towards something else that's more confusing. That's basically the job of fascism. Not a speck of class consciousness. Yeah, I agree. Airwave says, exactly, right-wing populism is usually a hair away from fascism. Yeah, and even left-wing populism, people like Kyle Kulinski, also, I mean, anti-communist, because they want to divert you into this vague anti-establishment stuff. Though a lot of their rhetoric and the things that they will praise will tend to be closer to what socialists would do. Mikey says, yeah, it's people versus elites, but who the people and who the elites are is hazy. Yes, and that's where you can get into some of the racist stuff. Like, who are the real people? For example, look at very, very, well-known example, Nazi Germany. Who are the people? The true, well, insert like all the crazy contradictory Nazi race theories. And who are the elites? Well, they racialized class struggle, and falsely so. I mean, obviously. As Marxists, we know that class and not race is the motivating force of history. So, yeah, they took class struggle and via right-wing populism, Nazism, they turned it into racial struggle while keeping the same dynamic of the little guy versus the big guy, but completely distorting and polluting the common person's understanding of that, or at least people who went for that. Charmander, S4A, do you think Trump is a fash or is it just liberal fear-mongering? I think that there has been a fascist far-right in the United States for a very long time. You can go back, I mean, all the way, it parallels the rise of fascism in Italy and Germany and so forth. It's been here the whole time. It's reactionary capital and the mass movements that go in for it, which tend to go for white supremacist rhetoric and stuff like that. A lot of that got, the KKK, obviously, things like that. A lot of that got stamped out in the mid 20th century during the Great Class Peace, the golden age of social democracy, and then during the conservative counter-reaction in the 70s that became neoliberalism. They start to ease up the restrictions on the far right, so it starts creeping back in, especially after the Vietnam War, because the Vietnam War was a Nazi war, basically. It was an anti-communist war where, why are we, fighting in Vietnam? Well, to stop the Reds. It was explicitly an anti-communist war. So the U.S. was training soldiers to go murder communists. Like, that was the entire purpose of that war. So the Vietnam vets who survived and didn't turn against it, many of them joined right-wing paramilitary groups that listened to things like the John Birch Society on shortwave radio and stuff like that. And so you had these right-wing fascist paramilitary and militia networks for a long time. The Super Patriot movement, sovereign citizens, stuff like that. They're always there. People like, Alex Jones came along and kind of like, cozied up to those people and was a more mainstream version of those people. And then during the Bush-Cheney years, you get things like the militiamen, the Minutemen. If you remember that, helping out the cops on the U.S.-Mexico border, the Minutemen. Remember that being a big thing in like 2006, 2007. That was, I think, when you get right-wing vigilantism, that's certainly the beginnings of the mass movement part of fascism. Then after 2008, the Tea Party, because the Republicans really, they had burned out the goodwill. They couldn't use the Bush-Cheney wing of their party. They needed a new face, and they took these like libertarian, crypto-fash, Tea Party, right-wing populist shock troops, all these crazies, and Sarah Palin and all that. They come out of the woodwork. So it's, as the system falls deeper into crisis, the more that they need these people. This turns into birtherism, which became MAGA, which became the Trump presidency. Do I think that it is fascist or just liberal fear-mongering? I think that the U.S. is closer to a fascist coup than it has ever been. And I think that there is a long history of fascism, which, yes, those people were just, they liked Trump for the most part. They thought that Trump was the closest thing to representing them. I don't know what else people are really looking for in terms of fascism to like recognize it as such. This is something that we're going through right now with the truck convoy. You get like, left populists, and I see way too much out of this out of the Green Party, for example, who are, falling for some of the, anti-vax stuff, and then they're supporting the anti-mandate stuff. That's terrible. Terrible. Seriously. Go sit in the corner. You got a fascist movement right in front of your face, and you can't recognize it. This is a huge problem. I mean, people, I think, are really numb to what fascism is and how to identify it. If it's not literally wearing a swastika, and even sometimes when it is, they can't even see it. So I think people really need perspective on like what is going on here. But as far as the, again, let's do some class analysis. Where does support for fascism come from? Finance capital with kind of like mass movement in the petty bourgeoisie. I mean, you just described MAGA. What do? Scapegoating of Muslims, immigrants, feminists, LGBTQ. Yeah. Like, I don't know what other boxes we need to check at this point. It's closer to that than ever. Yes. So, could there be something worse than Trump? Yeah. I mean, could there have been something worse than Hitler? Yeah, we just didn't get to that point. So, yes, I think that there has always been, far-right paramilitary networks and extremists. And I think that under Trump, we've seen them organizing for active political power, bankrolled by the most reactionary circles of capital. This is the most organizing from them that we've ever seen. Yeah. Big Red Boy, 1, 2, 3, 4. Anti-Masonry. Yes, anti-Masonry. Actually, it hasn't come back in a mainstream way. So I was mentioning, anti-women, anti-gay, anti-immigrant, anti-other religions, anti-Freemasonry. I did a video on the channel, How to Overthrow the Illuminati, which is a Marxist alternative. It's like a Marxist deconstruction of that kind of, conspiracy theory stuff. Anti-Masonry has not come back in a mainstream way. If you go to conspiracy underground sites, though, it does. To me, it's like Freemasonry is kind of weird, and it has functioned as a kind of old boys network, a business network of who gives each other contract. I mean, and then it has the kind of odd ties to royalty and all that kind of stuff. It hasn't come back, but yes, you're right. That has classically been a part of fascism as well. I guess this is the thing about populism. It's like, were those farmers wrong to stand up against the banks? No, the banks were obviously screwing them. And it's like, people who are against Freemasonry. This is, again, when populism, there's no solid basis to it. You'll get people, if you look at the anti-Masonry movement, for example, you'll get Christians who were anti-Freemason just because they thought it was, some weird satanic religion that wasn't Christian enough for them and they weren't good Christian people and whatever. Then you would get some people who are anti-Masons because they felt that the Masons were a business network that was cronyism and was, not allowing free competition in their area. And, they were getting all the political networks and stuff like that. I mean, I'd say from like a left-wing perspective, one of those things is a little bit more easy to work with from a kind of class conflict kind of standpoint. But the way that it gets expressed in populism is totally muddled. So, but good point. Anti-Freemasonry. You can see that in Italian fascism and in German fascism. Although some people point out, like, if you look at the Operation Gladio, which was BBC did a 3-part special on it. These were basically fascist stay-behind networks that NATO and the CIA set up in Europe in case of a communist uprising in Western Europe. But then they started activating them, I believe, in the 80s and 70s anyway. And one of the rally points, or like secret headquarters of this fascist network, was a Masonic lodge. So it's like, are the fascists actually anti-Mason, or like, are their, bases actually like using some, anyway, and it could just be that really there's there's nothing grounded in the anti-Masonry thing at all. Anyway, Scanning Darkly says, Hungarian politics are a bit of a mess. Left East has the best coverage, in my opinion. Current prime minister came to power as a third-way lib and went right after the protests in 2006 and recession of 2008, and even further right after 2015. This prime minister, Orban, is the poster child of right populism in Europe. Thank you, that is ringing a bell now. Opposition was fractured up until recently and have rallied around a center-right populist far-right party rebranded as a right populist opposition party 4 years ago, so it's a shit show. Sounds like a shit show. And it sounds like what's happening across the capitalist world. Elections in April. Mikey says, Tucker Carlson, a rich guy from Walhalla, fancy San Diego, is a populist. Yeah, it's like, it's so insulting. And that's the thing about the people who go in for this kind of like Tucker Carlson rhetoric. First of all, Tucker Carlson, I like to say, is if they had cable TV back in Nazi Germany, it would basically look like Tucker Carlson. It's so insulting to people's intelligence who fall for that crap. He has nothing but contempt for you, and the people who fund him have nothing but contempt for you, and they can't wait to just drive you, petty bourgeois people, out of business and pick over your corpse. It's just, it's so sickening that people fall for it, honestly. What can I say? We just have to keep organizing. Cart Horse says, Tucker is a genius at rhetoric. I think genius is an overstatement. I think that there's no shortage of people willing to believe this garbage. I think that's more like that. And having a gimmick with shock stories and various facial expressions. I know, he's constantly looking like, oh God, that hideous the face of confusion where he cocks his head to one side. a total shit, but a clever devil at manipulating the gullible. And I think that that's the thing is like, I don't know, do you have to be a genius to manipulate the gullible? You know, I don't think you have to be a genius to bring out the worst in people. I really don't. Mikey says, I want to make a movie series that takes place in a quasi company town. Yeah, actually, there's a movie with Frances McDormand. I want to say it's called Nomadland, which kind of highlights the whole like people living in RVs working for like Amazon as temp workers kind of situation, and it's really sad. So yeah, I mean, you could do something more of like a, non-mobile, like people trapped in a company town thing. But yeah, that was the thing. I mean, it's like libertarians. They practically want to bring back like corporate script and stuff like that. Charmander says, Tucker is really good at propaganda. He's very good at seeming like he isn't one of the elites he rails against. I mean, it doesn't work on me, so I don't personally think he is very good at it. Again, I think it's just we have a population that is very much predisposed to reactionary inclinations, and also having the gigantic kind of budget that Fox News has behind it, I'm sure doesn't hurt. Mista says, hey comrades, hey Mista. Oit says, Carlson's father is also the former director of Voice of America. He's about as connected to the establishment as one can be. Yeah, I mean, I know, I just, I would like to have a conversation with these people sometimes. Like, why do you fall for this shit? It's so textbook. Dan says, when do I think the next Red Scare 2.0 will come? I mean, aren't we living through it now? It's China. If you go talk to MAGA and stuff, they're like so hyped up about China, communist China. It's like, what video was it that I put in that that Vietnamese American woman who was running for Congress as a like Tea Party MAGA person in California, where she's like, the communists. She says it like 49 times in like a 2-minute political ad. I mean, I think it's on. And in fact, if anything, I feel like the big bourgeoisie really doesn't want to do a full court press about communism because they're kind of afraid it's going to backfire on them. Just a guess. I just got to take a break for 1 sec. Everybody hang out. All right, I'm back. Excuse me. Probably should have kept the mic off for another second. I said hang out. Actually, that should have been hang tight, but now I'm back, so hanging out is what we're doing. Where were we? So, whereas Sean Hannity or Bill O'Reilly were just obvious dumb loudmouths, Tucker a more dangerous foe. Tucker, to me, has like reverse charisma. I really don't know why anyone listens to him. I don't think he's very good at what he does, but that's me. I mean, really, he's kind of a joke. Honestly, I don't get it. Unelectable Airwave says, are we about to have a big recession? Is there anything that the left can do to try to harness some of the anger? So 2 questions. Well, first of all, is there anything the left can do? Yeah, there's always something that the left can do. Keep agitating, propagandizing, and educating, and encouraging people to get organized. And The best, I'm trying to emphasize this more when I tell people to join orgs. The best advertising for joining an org is making a difference in your community. You don't have to like convince people to join an org as much. When you make a difference in your community's life, they will just ask you, "Hey, how do I join?" So, yeah, get out there, get active, identify problems, talk to the community, hold a public meeting, and say, "Hey, we are an organization in your community. We want to help solve problems in this community." Have a big whiteboard and say, "We want to go around, and I want everybody to list 2 or 3 of the biggest problems you and your family and friends face in your life. We're going to put them on the board, and we're going to start brainstorming about what to do about it." That is how that among other tactics is how you involve people in the process. So, yeah, there's a lot the left can do. Absolutely. Are we about to have a big recession? I'm not an economist per se. I mean, I know enough I can sort of follow things. Yes, I think that they are keeping the stock market and prices and everything artificially high. I think that we're really due for a gigantic correction. I mean, you just look at house prices. It's not just inflation. Like, prices are going up really artificially. I wish I could say more than that. I'm not like a economist per se, but yes, first of all, we know capitalism tends to crash every 7 years or whatever. So we're due, and I think that they have been taking measures during this pandemic, which really, I think, in some ways should have been the next 2008. They took measures to kind of stave off some of the worst, but I think that the other shoe is going to drop, like, pretty soon, probably. Let's put it this way. Look at COVID, for example. They're not relaxing all the COVID protections because it makes good public health sense. They're doing it out of economic desperation. So there's one guide. But yeah, I mean, we had 2008, and they really didn't fundamentally fix a lot of the stuff that was wrong. So yeah, I think that we probably will have a big recession. Excuse me. Hold on a second. I got to clear my throat. All right. Hopefully that's better. Where was I? Yeah, they haven't corrected a lot of the underlying problems from 2008. When it crashes, I think it will be bigger. I think that qualifies as a big recession. Reading for Liberation says, "Hello, populism has a track record for going fascist. One only need look at Huey Long." I mean, I think that's just part of its nature. Particularly, I mean, Huey Long, like I said, the longer that populism goes on and the more of an alternative that Marxism presented, the more anti-Marxist populism was by just sheer virtue of the fact that it existed and wasn't Marxist. So yeah, especially as you get into the 1920s, 1930s, populism was, arguably closer to the fascist movements than the socialist movements that fascism was explicitly opposed to. Mikey says, "As a part Apache person, America has always been kind of fascy." Yeah, it's a settler colonial nation that has always required a pretty high degree of reaction among its settler population just to maintain, maintain cohesion through the basic contradictions and atrocities of all the land grab, the native genocide, the importing of the African nation to like be a sub-nation within the United States that was explicitly just exploited for slave labor and treated as property. I mean, to maintain cohesion of society, yeah, the term is escaping me, but I mean, the ruling class of that, which is, the settler colonial ruling class, needs of its settler population that they do not side with the other exploited nations, either the native indigenous nations whose land is being stolen and who are being murdered by the millions, and also not to side with the, Africans forcibly brought over to the United States. So yeah, I mean, and you can see this in Israel today. Uh, Israel to me, as far as what they're doing to the Palestinians, it's like very comparable and extremely right wing as a country politically. You pull a random. We were talking about this in the last live stream. I think Israel is maybe the only country where if you pull a random person off the street, you can get worse political opinions than you can get in the U.S. You need that when the basic project of your country is so incredibly unjust. Cardhorse says the far right in the USA is much more neo-Confederate than far right elsewhere. Yeah, I mean, the U.S. also has like the whole Civil War that was never properly ended. The Confederacy was never properly exterminated. I mean, so you get the rise of the kind of the Confederate flags and all that kind of stuff. It's not treated the same way as a Nazi flag. It's not illegal. So, yeah, they definitely use that as a rallying point. Arnfm says the U.S. Army did in Vietnam what the Wehrmacht did in Eastern Europe. I mean, and then some. I mean, Nixon was considering using nuclear weapons in Vietnam, executing unarmed civilians under the suspicion of hiding rebels. Yeah. I mean, then, and sometimes just wiping out villages that they didn't even reasonably suspect of that. Horrible stuff. I mean, beyond horrible. I actually, I picked up a book at one point. I was in a used bookstore, and I saw a book of, like, U.S. intellectuals' quotes about the Vietnam War. There was, like, literally not a single one in support. It was people from, like, left, right, and center. Every single one of them was like, what the U.S. is doing is just war crimes. And it's, like, equivalent to Nazi Germany. And that was 50 years ago, and it just hasn't been dealt with in U.S. history. The U.S. just keeps plowing along, just keeps committing more atrocities. When this all catches up, oh boy. I mean, the patriotic socialists think they're going to still be flying the U.S. flag. When this all catches up, I think we're going to see a major reorganization of what we currently, understand as the United States. Mikey says, Trump is a fascist. Yes, liberals sometimes overplay how effective he would be, or underplayed how effective he would be. Let me add to that, liberals also don't have good systemic analysis of capitalism. They won't really even talk about capitalism at all. They won't talk about either their own imperialist wars as a product and necessity for the system that they stand for, and they won't talk about how Trump and MAGA and the Tea Party and all that stuff is also a necessity of the system that they themselves stand for. So, yeah, they don't have good system analysis there. Reading for Liberation says U.S. is headed down a dark path. Yeah, I don't see this really turning out too rosy, honestly. Airwave says the American left is so desperate for any type of win that we see any threat or harm to the empire as a sign of progress. I mean, in a way, it kind of is. That's not to say that the empire doesn't have something else up its sleeve. But like I said, when imperialist countries get weakened, that's also, capitalism is defeated where it is weakest. So we want that. Scanning Darkly, also worth mentioning that Tucker Carlson is a big fan of Orban's Hungary. I think he's set to do a special about the country soon. He came over here and interviewed the prime minister, and it was all over the press because government friends largely control the press. That is interesting. That I would keep an eye out for. Actually, I'm going to make a note of that right now. Tucker Carlson, Orban special. There you go. That's how it happens, folks. That's how S4A videos get born. You just witnessed it. Conception phase. Anti-Masonry, Cardhorse says, is basically anti-French Revolution in origin. Yeah, this is in that How to Overthrow the Illuminati video, like how because Freemasonry back then was used for plotting, because you have a secret society which has the secret handshakes and it can keep secrets and stuff like that. Therefore, it naturally lends itself. You have a security network there. If you're trying to do conspiratorial revolutionary organizing, even if that eventually will have like a mass movement component to it, then yeah, I mean, it makes sense that Freemasonry like served as some of the basis for that because they could keep secrets. And in that process, I mean, yes, it could be tied to popular unrest as well, but it was a bourgeois revolution. And yeah, it kind of made sense. That's where they could do some of the planning for it. But to try to carry that over into today doesn't always make sense. Airwaves. I think that Hungary special already came out, but I could be wrong. All right. Reading for Liberation. One should connect Gladio to the Gladio to the Phoenix program. Yeah, I mean, all that anti-communist stuff. The Phoenix program was a horrible thing where people in Vietnam were disappeared and just murdered secretly. I had that correctly in large numbers. Gladio, different in the nature of the operation. It was fascist sympathizing stay-behinds who were scattered behind and could be activated by Western intelligence in case, these were fervent anti-communists who had military training, and the little terrorist cells of them could be activated in the event of an attempted communist takeover of Western Europe. So yeah, I mean, that's explicitly capitalism will use fascists as, to prevent communist revolution. That's really what it's all about. And the Phoenix program also obviously it's explicitly anti-communist violence. And Propaganda Due, P2, with Italian prime ministers in it. Yeah, that was the name of the Masonic lodge that the Gladio in Italy was run out of. There were also Belgian false flag attacks run by fascists and blamed on the left. So, yeah. Fred Engels adds, Operation Gladio also assassinated one of the leaders of the Belgian Communist Movement. Well, there you go. I don't know if I saw your comment out of the corner of my eye, but yeah, it was in Belgium. I want to say it was somewhere else too, but those are the two that come to mind. Gladio operatives also killed the Italian prime minister. Yes, Aldo Moro, I believe was his name. This was blamed on the Red Brigades. It was blamed on communists. So it was explicitly fascists doing violence to blame on communists to hurt communists in the public eye. Card Horse, what happened with Masonry is it became a formula for how to make an org with a hierarchy so you can weed out people you don't want. It got copied by all kinds of groups left and right. Yeah. Reading for Liberation, Tucker Carlson is a failed CIA reject. Yeah, it's, what's that song? They wouldn't have you in the Mafia. Oh, yeah, I know you're working for the CIA. They wouldn't have you in the Mafia. Well, I guess Tucker Carlson didn't even make that cut, so he's over at Fox News. Airwaves, yeah, Pod Damn America just did a mini-series about Gladio, and their first episode was great. They touched on anti-communist activity all over Europe. And, yeah, there's a book, Daniela Ganser, Danielegganser, I believe, wrote a book. I've yet to read this book. I've had it as a PDF for a long time, called NATO's Secret Armies, I believe is the title. I think that guy was, and he speaks, but all the speeches I've seen are in German. So if you don't speak German, might not be as helpful. I don't know if he does any in English, but I think that guy was like the, sort of original, main researcher on that topic, if anyone's interested. Airwave says, Tucker has a team of Nazi writers making him seem like a genius. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much any show like that. It's not just like, at S4A, I actually write what I say. If you're on Fox News, Tucker's not like backstage furiously scribbling notes before the show, like trying to write the entire script himself, for sure. T.R. Welly, good evening, comrade. Good evening to you, too. Mikey says, I hate her, the Tea Party California lady. Yes. I mean, it's reprehensible. Charmander says, Tucker's rhetoric won't work on well-read Marxist-Leninists, but he's the most watched news show in the nation, and all his viewers go on about how they hate mainstream media, like the cognitive dissonance, my God. Yeah, and again, this is, the failure of anti-establishment populism. There's no class consciousness at all. So, just a ton of confusion, and we do need to confront it, I just got blocked by somebody on Twitter who was, saying I was a shit communist for, I can't even go back and read it now because they blocked me, but for, the trucker convoy is standing up against government overreach. And I'm just like, well, Grover Norquist would be, I'm sure, super proud, that the Green Party is adopting those kinds of, Comments, it's just such horrible analysis. Yeah, cognitive dissonance indeed. Radish says, we need some dope socialist jams for break music. Well, when I work out how to, when I figure out how to work the controls on Twitch that much, possibly. TR Welly, as a Canadian, I'd like to apologize for the trucks. They certainly do not represent our values. So, in other words, you want to say sorry? No. Yeah, I said at the end of my video last night, or no, I think it was the one today on Puerto Rico. Like, I'm aware that Canada really prides itself on not being the United States. So, the fact that they're making international headlines for like a U.S. funded MAGA Donald Trump QAnon movement, I'm sure is like every Canadian pretty much is like rolling over in their grave right now, and every living Canadian is cringing to death. All the more reason to up those left coalition's presence and, stamp out fascism in your country. Arnafem, in the new Red Scare, they tell the Republicans that China's evil communist regime that wants to turn their son gay, and the, quote, the left that China is actually just as capitalist imperialist as the USA. Oh, so I think you're referring to the fact that it's like Schrodinger's China, where on the one hand, it's actually just, China's capitalist. And on the other hand, they're also like evil communists that, are going to destroy Western values. Which is it? It's just like Antifa. It's the same thing, the same exact thing. Antifa super soldiers are going to destroy your small town. Also, Antifa wants to like totally... Yeah, it's these contradictory statements. I can't even bring myself to repeat it. It's so disgusting. Airwaves need some background music. Enjoy the silence, my friend. Red Wizard, Tucker is just brazen, and that's what gives him attention in Fox. Yeah, I mean, what do conservatives like? They like this kind of, iconoclastic, I'm an asshole kind of behavior. Well, congrats. Airwave says, from what I understand, they need to raise interest rates to slow the inflation. I think the inflation is largely fabricated, made by companies raising prices because they think they can get away with it. So maybe they can avoid raising interest. Yeah, I'm not sure. They have all kinds of tricks. That's all I can say. The fact is capitalism crashes, so you're always just counting down a certain number of years until the next crash. Right now, prices are insanely high. And it's far beyond whatever the actual inflation is. I read somewhere there's like 7% inflation, but the prices are up more like 20-30%. It's just not the same. Charmander says, what do I think of Richard Wolff supporting the Freedom Convoy? Here's what I think. Fuck Richard Wolff. So I did a bunch of videos about Wolff this past like May and June, I think. And so there's a playlist up on the channel, Understanding Richard Wolff. I did a lot. I mean, I read some of his articles. I thought they were bad. You can find out my more detailed thoughts beyond just bad, in the videos. I did commentary on his interview by Hakeem. I thought Hakeem asked great questions, and I thought that Wolff gave not great answers most of the time. I think that Wolff is kind of a charlatan who is giving a lot of easy and often incorrect answers to things, and is riding this, populist wave all the way to the bank. He makes about $12,000 a month on Patreon alone. So I had somebody say to me, "Oh yeah, Richard Wolff isn't making money off of this," and I just screenshotted the Patreon, and they blocked me. So I'm like, okay, well, that's easier than looking at the difficult reality, I guess. So there's that. I don't think that his analysis is consistently very good. So I'm not entirely surprised. I think that if you don't stand up directly against fascism, then you are supporting it. And I think that Richard Wolff is not standing up directly against it. So fuck Richard Wolff. Again, more specifically, there was an article from, I think, 2002 from where he teaches in Massachusetts, the student newspaper, where he's interviewed declaring 20 years ago now that he was going to redefine Marxism in exactly the way that he's trying to do, as Marxism is co-ops and this kind of stuff. So we have a word for that. It's revisionism. It's especially revisionism when you explicitly state that your goal is to redefine Marxism. It doesn't get much more revisionist than that. So anyway, that's what I think Richard Wolff is all about. I think that specifically on the Freedom Convoy, this is a new low that I wasn't expecting, but my opinion was already not super great about him. Cardhorse, liberals believe in ideas and manners instead of class. Yeah, liberals believe in Harry Potter. I mean, really, the more liberals that can learn that class conflict is the motive force of history, please, the more the better, and please quickly. Oitz says, if I recall correctly, Kissinger had to talk Nixon out of using nukes in Vietnam. Something is not right when Kissinger is the voice of reason in a conversation. Yeah, I mean, and let me add to that, as far as we're talking about right-wing populism, Nixon's whole the silent majority, that was a very right-wing populist appeal, where he's like, all you people out there who, hate all the black and brown people, you're the silent majority, and I'm activating you now. And, that was a guy who got forced out of office. That was, the relative strength of the left at that time. And the Democratic Party was, at that time, a bit more beholden to its more liberal and quasi-socialist base. At that time, this was 50 years ago. Things just, the terrain has shifted at this point. Charmander, he went on Jimmy Dore's show in support of it. Yeah, I knew that Wolff had given support. So if you actually go and look up, because I did recently, Richard Wolff's statement on Twitter regarding the, being supportive of the anti-mandate, or that the anti-mandate struggles, and this was before the truck convoy, the anti-mandate struggles are an important part of, recognizing workers' demands, and, sometimes they get, piggybacked on by the far right. No, it's the far right pushing them. This is just ignorance of what the far right has been doing and what the anti-vaccine movement, which has been part of the far right since forever, has been doing. This is just one of their tactics. Like, they got shut down on being anti-vax itself, so they switched to anti-mandate. It's not super complicated. Anybody who gets that sincerely wrong needs to just stop. But he tweeted about that, and people are like, yeah, I think it's only the cops union, though. Like, what are you doing? This isn't a worker's demand. He was roundly criticized for that and didn't back off of it. So I say fuck Richard Wolff. Richard Wolff also says fuck us because he doesn't listen. Hold on, I'm getting a little stuffy. Hang on. All right. RNFM, liberals talk about systemic issues in the police, but their analysis always stops at naming the system. Some of them don't even recognize the existence of classes. Yeah, so something I was thinking about recently, this week, the saddest I have ever been so far making an S4A video was making the Justice for Amir Locke video, the massive protests that are going on in Minneapolis currently. Honestly, this just affects me like nothing else has doing the channel, and I cover a lot of pretty tragic stuff on the channel. What I don't want to have happen is for it to become kind of just routine where somebody gets murdered by the police, everybody takes a few days off and does mass rallies, and nothing changes. We need to tie this in, and I know that people are working on it. I'm not trying to take away from the slightest in the people who are engaged in that struggle. I fear sometimes that it's just going to become the norm, where it's like somebody got shot, let's go do this thing, but nothing ever changes. The point is change. So, we've got to go beyond that kind of liberalism, which doesn't really see a major change possible. Mikey, thanks also for doing the audiobook and commentary videos. Well, you're welcome. I enjoy it, and it's a part of my life that I need to do at this point. T.R. Welly, there's a good book written debunking the Holodomor famine by Douglas Toddy. Here's the link for the PDF. Book has been scrubbed from libraries. It's called Fraud, Famine, and Fascism. Thank you, because I don't think Twitch lets you post the links. That might be a setting I can turn off. I will make a note of that now. Let me write that down and note link settings. Note to myself there. Okay. Why can't we be friends? That's the song. Yes, it is. A lot of the content creators I watch, used to watch, Mikey says, were very anti-theory. Well, that's just dumb because really, it's not a good move because in Marxism, theory and history are intertwined. It's scientific socialism. That's like saying I'm pro-science, but I'm anti-learning, about anyone else's experiments. Well, I guess you're not actually pro-science now, are you? Because that's really part of it. Anglo-America should give the land back. Yes. Mista says, it's comical how much YouTube loves to recommend right-wing videos when I'm on your channel. I know, I see it too. I don't know where it comes from. I get stuff recommended all the time that I'm not subscribed to. I'm not subscribed to anything remotely like it. It's the YouTube algorithm. It's known for making Nazis. Excuse me. Earlier, it recommended a Fox News journalist interviewing one of the truckers. Most of the time, it's usually this one Jordan Peterson video. Yeah, use that, click the 3 dots and click the I'm not interested in this or whatever. I don't know if it has any effect, on the algorithm, but it may stop it from appearing in your thing. Because really, who even wants to look at that? Jimmy Walker says, hello. Airwave says, I used to get recommendations for the same Glenn Greenwald video all the time. It seemed to learn after I never click on it, though. I don't know. I get the same video, and they're not even always political, but it'll just recommend the same fucking... Like, you watch one music video once, and then you're looking at it for the next 5 years. I don't know what that's about. A. Tyler B. Before I saw some of your vids on Wolf, I used him as an introductory jump for my study into Marx. And now that his contradictions and, as you said, revision of Marxism are laid out to sea, it's very blatant. Yeah, I agree. And it's a real problem. Fortunately, you got to Wolf maybe during his slightly better phase and went this way. But it's entirely possible that people from here on are going to listen to Wolf and go more in a fascist direction. This populism. Not good. So Mista says, it won't let me click not interested on the video at the top of the recommended list. It's annoying. That is too bad. Charmander says, how old was I when I got into leftism? Not necessarily ML, but more than SOCDEM. So, I was exposed to Marx late in high school, and I started referring to myself as a communist then. It was frowned upon. I literally didn't meet anyone else who thought this way, although, I was in more alternative crowds and people were into various different subcultures and things and tended to have more of a left analysis on social issues, although, it was definitely... what do I want to say there? Yeah, no one was a communist. Let me just say that. It was not really until kind of after college years that I went out in the world and started getting more involved in that. But I had to go way, way, way out of my way to find, left organizations and to get recommendations on radical history and just not, I think what's been going on since, like I said, Occupy, for example, has made it all much more accessible. People talk about capitalism now. I was trying to do this in those days. So it was I thought of myself as somebody who, from late teen on, who, I identified as a communist. I thought it was good ideas. But also the narrative of everyone around me was communism's dead, forget about it. And, I kind of did. I kind of just shut up. But then, with the, like I said, I did anti-war stuff. So, in the Iraq War, anti-war coalition, there were people like Answer. And so you could start meeting socialists through that. But it was weak. I don't know how else to put it. In the 2000s, the socialist movement was weak. And you could always find anarchists around. I guess that's what I was trying to say is, like I said, I was around kind of more alternative people who would have kind of a left analysis, but it was like way more anarchist. Nobody was a Marxist at all. And that's the state of the left. I think we're starting to pull it out of that ditch now with some resistance and struggle, obviously, but like, I think we're pulling it out of the ditch of anarchism finally. But for a long time, that was about the best you could find was anarchism. And I think a lot of my friends were kind of anarchists. They may not even have been into the bread book, but like if you sort of took their opinions, that's what it amounted to. So, A Tyler B says, I got to wolf around when he was on the Bad Faith podcast and it was heavy on the worker co-ops. Yeah, I mean, he's an academic and like he's got a lot in terms of his reputation and like academic ego wrapped up in like promoting co-ops. It's fucking like it's a total failure of a strategy, but that's not going to stop him from like letting his ego like dictate what he talks about in that sense. But yeah, unelectable airwaves. A lot of people are. Oh, sorry, I misread that comment. Never mind. Arnafem says, I'm considering also doing like communist YouTube videos because the biggest actually ML channel in my native language has like 240 subs and uploads every 2 months. Yeah, honestly, it's like I said, like with an org, if you're not like actually a presence in the life of your community will move on. So, the best advertisement for an organization or whatever, or an outlet is being a consistent, relevant presence that actually gives people something that they can use, solves problems in their lives, does something for them. If you don't do that, I mean, people are just gonna, at best, ignore you. So, yeah, you need to actually put out content. What is your native language, by the way? Cardhorse says anarchism dies because you get tired of getting no results. Well, yeah. So I mentioned that, and although I felt I was more of a Marxist, I hadn't gone into it to the point of reading like Stalin's Anarchism or Socialism, and I wasn't around enough communists where we would even get to the point of like having the communism versus anarchism debate. So, this resulted in, even after being exposed to Marx, I kind of had more of like an anarchist phase where I would read, some anarchist stuff. But it did die for me for exactly the reason of, I remember distinctly sitting at a desk one time, reading something and going, how do anarchists take power? And pretty much from then on, I was on the road back to Marxism. Seriously, for that exact reason. And I think that a lot of people gravitate towards anarchism due to false consciousness from Cold War propaganda. I know that influenced it for me also. So I think, like I said, we're starting to pull it out of that ditch and we're starting to rehab communism. But, and the fact that China is probably going to overtake the U.S. as like the world's biggest economy in the not too distant future doesn't hurt. And people are like, communism's dead. Because, like, as we said before, it's like the Schrodinger's China. It's like, oh yeah, well, socialism doesn't work. Oh yeah, what about China? It's capitalist. Oh yeah, well, should we do that? No, it's communism. Like, okay, pick a lane, pick a lane. But yeah, so it took me a while to get to the point of realizing that anarchism gets no results, but I did, and here we are now. Charmander, I grew up and live in a very reactionary military town, and even when I got interested in Bernie, they went crazy calling me a commie. Very hard to be a communist here. I was talking to my grandpa had a dog named the N-word, hard R, reactionary. I'm sorry for you and everyone else like you in that situation. That is... But this is the U.S., you know what I mean? Like, it can be kind of horrific just trying to exist here. Yeah. I don't know what to say. That's horrible. And I'm glad... I mean, yet another reason why channels like this are important. You know what I mean? Because there are a lot of kids growing up who could use the support. Mikey says, I went from a Christian Dem to a social democrat to anarchist to more of an eco-Marxist. That's not an uncommon path, that's not an uncommon path. And we want to keep that pipeline rolling. So I'm just trying to make it as easy as possible. And everyone else who can too, either support somebody doing the work that you like, or if you feel that your talents are in that direction, do it yourself, you know? It helps. Airwave says, hell yeah, S4A is one of the few streamers that actually knows what they're talking about. I would say that's primarily because I'm not a streamer. I don't just, when you make the core of your thing just kind of, stream of consciousness, like talking about stuff live, I don't think, I'll use it as a supplemental time, a couple times a month. Right now I'm trying to get established as an affiliate, and you got to do a certain amount of hours and appearances to do that. But beyond that, yeah, you can use it as a supplement to kind of just catch up on stuff and chat with people, and that's kind of fun. But, there's a reason I base the channel in audiobooks and in current events commentary that is more researched and put together, not live. Because, that's how you keep your quality level up. So, I think that a lot of people who just go out there, it's like, Jackson Hinkle, the sort of like infracell wannabe, just kind of sad. But there's like clips of him like, everything I do is for the clout. Yeah, you may be trying to say that ironically, like you might be saying that for clout, like, wow, this guy's so audacious. He'll say that, he does everything for clout. What impressive hyperbole. Yeah, but no, it actually is true. Like, there's no substance. It's very shallow. It's very superficial. You need something deeper there. RNFM, radical leftists are completely irrelevant here. Well, you got to start somewhere. Germany. Okay. Yeah, so actually, RNFM, can you talk about, are you in former West Germany or former East Germany? And what is the legacy of anti-communism like in your country? I imagine more than anyone else, you have to hear the socialism didn't work thing. What is that situation like? Oit says, S4A, what are my thoughts on non-leftist labor unions like the AFL-CIO, specifically WRT? I don't know what WRT is. The AFL-CIO's history of backing U.S. imperialism. So let's say, first of all, about the AFL-CIO, that it was not always the AFL-CIO, or as some people say, the AFL-CIA today. The AFL used to be the AFL, and the CIO used to be the CIO. It's the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations, I believe it stands for. Once upon a time, those were separate organizations. Actually, the AFL is the older of the two, and it existed, I believe, back into the 19th century. So it was when the IWW was founded, and the IWW comes out of more of a radical labor union tradition, more akin to like the Knights of Labor, which was more populist, but, kind of going in more of a Marxist direction, although prior to Marxism-Leninism. Then the IWW came out in 1905, and you had people like Eugene Debs, who was a co-founder of that. I love Deb's speeches. I really like early IWW stuff a lot. I think it's one of the best examples of a U.S. mass organization that was actually on the right track. Really like them a lot. And I think that they had some really impressive history, too. They referred to the AFL as the AF of hell because the AFL, even back then, they would do union scabbing. Like, their union workers would break other unions' strikes. They would cross picket lines as a union. That's how fucked up they were. So there's definitely a gradient in terms of right-wing, more right-wing labor organizations and more left-wing ones. And of course, the IWW, they had a different slogan than the AFL. The AFL would say a decent, a decent wage for a decent day's work. I don't know, a fair. Wow, I think I've just been talking too long because I'm completely like butchering this quote. Everyone knows what it is. Just, I don't know. I can't even see it because I'm backed up in the chat. Fair day's wage for a fair day's work. Jesus, why was that so hard? Well, then the IWW countered it with abolition of the wage system. Like, how about that? How about no, forget the fair wages. How about we just have socialism? So yeah, the AFL was always kind of a reactionary union. Yes, it organized workers, okay, elementary class consciousness, but very limited. And it, was, I believe, illegal at the time to have black workers in the same union as white workers. The IWW did it anyway, though, The IWW was more radical and didn't give a shit. Um, and of course, the IWW got all tangled up. The CIO was kind of a slightly less radical, but also a pretty effective union that popped up, I believe, in the early 1930s. I believe that was at least like the beginning of their golden age. After the IWW got tangled up in internal splits and external Red Scares and all that kind of stuff. But they picked up the mantle, and then the CIO really organized a lot of workers into industrial unions. But like I said before about Taft-Hartley, kind of outlawed industrial unionism almost, or the most effective techniques of it. And all the radicals got driven out of the labor unions. So what happened? CIO collapsed to the point where in 1955, so note the time, just less than a decade after Taft-Hartley and McCarthyism, CIO withered up, shriveled, and got absorbed by AFL. So that is why it is AFL-CIO today, because it got broken down to the point where it got swallowed up. So what are my thoughts? I mean, better than nothing, still too exclusionary. I mean, it's not revolutionary consciousness at all. And, from more of a socialist union perspective, look at something like the IWW, which unfortunately gets too tangled up in anarchist thought, like way too much tangled up in anarchist thought. But their criticisms of what they call the business unions, like the AFL and their unions, that's pretty good starting point in terms of understanding, how. It's what Lenin wrote about of like social chauvinism and how the big bourgeoisie will buy off a certain strata of the working class using super profits from imperialism. I mean, arguably, things like the more reactionary unions like AFL are a building block for that. However, at this point, the labor movement has just been like decimated. So we got to do what we can with what we have, but at the same time, also like move it in as radical a direction that we can as possible. I don't feel satisfied with that answer, so you shouldn't either. But I don't really know. Aside from we need to like reconstitute the left. It's an ongoing process. But yeah, as far as those are my general thoughts. That was the question. What are my thoughts? Those are some of my thoughts. That's some of what I think people should know as background information. But go read more history about it. A. Tyler B. I went from conservative to liberal to SOCDEM to ML. Yeah, this happens. I would just say to people going along that pipeline, just make sure that you're really examining all of your beliefs along the way, because this is otherwise some of how we get, the kind of Nazbol phenomenon of like, I'm an ML. It's like, no, you are a conservative painted red, like it needs to penetrate a little deeper. Airwaves, how do anarchists intend on holding off capital? I mean, less effective anarchists don't really have a plan for that. More effective anarchists basically reinvent the worker state without calling it the worker state. I did see, God, I can't remember the name. It was something about like how to defend an anarchist society. Hold on, there's like a fire truck going by, so I'm going to pause the mic. All right, I think they're going. There's another one, but all right, no more sirens. There we go. Where was I? Yeah, there was some paper, some anarchist on Twitter was showing me, like, somebody wrote how to defend an anarchist society. It was kind of long. I was intending to look at it on the channel at some point as an audiobook because, I would bet you $10 that probably the paper just reinvents a worker state without calling it a worker state. I mean, this is the conclusion I came to, at which point just become an ML, that's what I think. Mikey Makes Mistakes said, also, I would use the term philosophical anarchism, like, yes, all hierarchy should be justified, duh. Yeah, this is like kind of, I think, a misunderstanding and straw manning of Marxists in general. Like, Marxists just want to go around like having hierarchy for hierarchy's sake. Like, we're socialists, okay? I mean, it's just, the straw manning is incredible. And again, the like lack of examination of certain pieces of anti-communist propaganda, like, it's the problem is a lot of these people are still choking on anti-communist propaganda. That's not to say that you can't look at the history of the USSR or China or Eastern Europe or any other socialist country and not have, I mean, I wouldn't agree with it, but not have some kind of fact-based argument that mistakes were made to a point where you don't feel like you can support that movement and it really should have been done differently. But that's usually not the conversation that's being had. I usually, it usually doesn't come from a fact-based place. It'll come from 9 times out of 10, Stalin screwed over the anarchists in the Spanish Civil War. Boom, period, end of argument. That's usually where it comes from because that's what young anarchists hear, or like early stage anarchists hear, and they usually that's compelling to them, and they never look at the history of actually actually existing socialism beyond that. So, I mean, that's not great critical thinking there, but I see a lot of people doing it. A. Tyler B., do I think the U.S. would ever implement a hybrid system like China, or is it better to hope for a full-on revolution in junk and capitalism? So, personally, I would not characterize China as a hybrid system of the type that the U.S. could adopt, okay? What I would say, and sorry, that sounds snarkier, but I don't mean it to sound that way. So, I just would like to push back on that, or correct that, at least from my understanding. So, what happened with China is they had a revolution that was fought, I mean, basically from like 1911 to 1949. They got invaded by Japan in the process. There were decades of civil war and just kind of like political power vacuum in the country during that time. So you're talking about like a 40-year period of struggle, like intense struggle involving armed conflict. That's what happened in China. Then China started building socialism and having, doing all the changes in their country to actually support a socialist system and lay all the foundations for that. And then they decided to, especially after breaking with the Soviet Union, that they needed to open up more and they needed to create more market space to like build up what they're doing. Now that part certainly has been effective. I mean, their technology has come an extremely long way since that time. But, and this is where people disagree. Was it full-on counter-revolution or not? And personally, I'm of the opinion that it was not full-on counter-revolution, that it is still socialist, although they have allowed much more capitalism in their country than anyone ever expected a socialist country to do. And will this eventually work, or will the country fall to capitalism? I don't think any one of us knows that. So, I mean, some people would say it already has. I disagree. But as far as the people who think it is still socialist, although allowing a smaller capitalist sector to exist, which is still suppressed, and the working class is still in charge of the country. So I think, that the U.S. adopting a system like that, China didn't adopt it. They had a revolution. They had a socialist control of their country, and then they allowed some space for capitalists so that they could build up their technology and productive forces more. At least the stated plan is not to let capitalism entirely take over. So I think I would kind of reject the question on that basis. Now, if you're saying, do I think that the U.S. would ever do social democracy again, which I don't think necessarily should be compared to capitalism. That option has been handed to them by Bernie Sanders, for example, or, look at PSL or the Green Party. Like, there is a platform of obvious reforms that need to be made in the U.S. because the material conditions are just crushing workers' lives. It gets very easy. Again, go look at the initial transitional demands of PSL or Greens or even Bernie. Although Bernie's is the weakest out of those three. They overlap, I'd say 80%. Because the problems that are, affecting people's lives right now are overwhelmingly obvious and really clear and easy to see. The U.S. ruling class is utterly refusing to do any of it. So, do I think that the U.S. is going to go social democratic? No, I think it's more likely to go fascist. In which case, There is only one chance for the left. It is to go anti-fascist, and that's about it. So, yeah. Mikey said, anyway, that hopefully that wasn't too long-winded and I didn't get too worked up talking about it. Mikey makes mistakes. I think I could do a good twice-weekly commie talk show where I chat with the audience, maybe even take calls from people who seem cool. I don't know. Yeah, it's not a bad idea. I have not factored that into kind of S4A channel planning, but I the live streams are. This is only the second one so far. It seems pretty good, so it's a possibility. Charmander says, have I done any audiobooks from the writings of the PCP or even the communists in the Philippines? I have not yet. I actually recently just asked the Twitter followers for recommendations from that sphere of things, and I got some recommendations from that sphere of things, and I downloaded some stuff, and I will be working it in at some point later in this year, but I'm probably not going to get to it for a while, like maybe the fall at the earliest. So, if there's if I wind up doing one or two things from it before then possibly. But I mean, what titles would you personally recommend? If I was to do one or two, like in the near future, what would you recommend? Oit says, with regards to is WRT. Got it. I thought on first glance it was like some organization. I didn't know what it was. Cardhorse says, if we want to beat Patriot tendency, Hinkle needs to be crushed. Haas, I think, pretty well is. Yeah, I got to say, Haas, I think, is kind of a living joke at this point. I mean, even at the time where I did a couple of videos on him, I think he was already going down in flames. And if you go into the comments, it's just sort of like people just bash, and I don't really get why he's even still going. But Cardhorse, IWW had toughs who would hop trains with crowbars to beat up Pinkerton agents. See, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, they were serious. If you watch the movie Matewan, interesting story about, one of the battles during the Cold War's years in Appalachia over, in a mining town between the company thugs and the union workers. There's a line in there where the organizer, played by Chris Cooper, comes to town, and he's like talking to the local union guys. And I think Cooper's from the United Mine Workers, which was one of the unions that the IWW was like kind of a super group. Like it was a bunch of existing unions came together and formed one big union, as they called it. But the mine workers were like a major part of that. And when I think it's Cooper's character says that he was, he's with the United Mine Workers, and one of the guys like, oh yeah, I used to be in the Wobblies back when it meant something. And I'm like, I think the movie's set in like the 20s or something, and the IWW, I guess at that point, had already kind of been really crippled. So yeah, no, they were serious, and they were getting it done for sure. Cardhorse also asks, there is a reason the CIA uses the AFL-CIO. Yeah, well, I mean, if you can steer a would-be instrument of class struggle towards the interests of imperialism, then you have just really crippled that would-be organ of class struggle, haven't you? Charmander says, do I think it's possible that the U.S. will persecute communists if a war with China breaks out? I don't know specifically. I mean, you can see MAGA frothing at the mouth already about, but they think Joe Biden's a communist. So I don't know. I think that some of the fashion networks like the Proud Boys and whatever, I mean, they already are very strongly anti-communist. I think that the concern more is people like that gaining state power because they will use the state apparatus really for that kind of thing. I don't think that, generally speaking, the Democrats are really in line to bring back McCarthyism in exactly the same way. Although if things get bad, you never know. I mean, don't ever underestimate them. But as it stands right now, I mean, it's clearly MAGA is already talking about such things. But again, they'll call everything communist. But yeah, do I expect to see... I don't know that they can manage it so much in the age of social media. This isn't the 1950s anymore. We'll see what happens, but uh, I hope not. But I'm inclined to say it's less likely unless the far right really gets state power, in which case I could see them making that more of a priority. Arnfm says, in FRG there was the radical Alleinerlass. Oh, so this is about anti-communism in Germany today. In FRG there was the Radikalernerlass in the 1950s in West Germany, and that was basically McCarthyism, where they threw communists out of any positions of power and into jail. And then there was, after the victory of the counter-revolution in the 90s, they threw out tens of thousands of ex-GDR teachers for ideology reasons. West Germany is thoroughly reactionary countries. No denazification here at all. There were high amounts of Nazis there were Nazis in high government positions until the 60s. Yeah. That's, for fighting a war against fascism, it was not a very thorough war against fascism, let's put it that way, on the part of, the supposedly anti-fascist coalition of the UK and US and that part of the Allies. Not very thorough at all. Because, again, these are the same people setting up the fascist stay-behind networks in Western Europe, that was explicitly for the purpose of fighting communism. That's always the priority. I mean, the imperialists had to settle scores among themselves. That was kind of the main cause of World War II. But also, fighting communism, that's really, what does that equate to, fighting communism? Hanging on to capitalism. That's kind of the main task. All right, Mikey says, yeah, former reactionaries don't even check themselves, then cry about being mistreated by leftist spaces. Some of those... being mistreated by leftists, like, oh yeah, I mentioned this actually in my last video about the truck convoy. I was like, look, if you're in the truck convoy and you feel like you're getting wrapped up in some far right stuff that you don't want to be a part of, do join the left. Channels like S4A exist, for the purpose of educating people, for being a point of entry. But you've also got to understand, like, you can't just be half socialist and half Nazi. That's not going to be allowed. And then you can't go off and cry about why I left the left, because, we're out here trying to protect ourselves. We're not just going to let you bring that in there. Hey, Tyler B, I got to head out, but glad to see all the people talking and getting conversation going. Keep it up. Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I'm going to probably head out pretty soon, too. We got a few more comments, but getting kind of tired. I got to move on. So Mikey says, yeah, I stopped being solely an anarchist when I realized, wait, this is just Lenin and Mao with extra steps. That's just modern Marxism. When me and my comrades would say what we should do. Yeah, I mean, it's again the phenomenon of anarchists reinventing the workers' state. You can either go in that direction, or you can just be kind of a liberal who talks about being anti-capitalist. Either way, I'm not a real fan of anarchism at all. Red Wizard, we cannot force history of other societies into our own, but we can learn from it and create our own movement. Yeah, well, this is kind of the essence of analyzing conditions. This is scientific socialism. This is understanding, Stalin's piece, Dialectical and Historical Materialism is all about this. Also, Mao's pieces on contradiction and analyzing the relative forces within a system, and doing class analysis. I'll often use a historical analogy, a similar situation, as kind of a rough jumping off point. Like, oh, this reminds me of that situation. But then you have to immediately correct for the differences. Like, say, except that in that case, you have this class composition, or it's coming off of this history, or whatever is the case, because every country has its own set of conditions and its own history. It's just like if you're a physicist and you're studying systems in motion, they all have commonalities in that they're subject to the same, forces of Newtonian mechanics, and so there's going to be similarities, but they each have their own path of trajectory. They have their own particular mass, they have their own aerodynamic composition. And so you've got to account for all that if you actually want to make sensible predictions and descriptions and statements. So, we can definitely learn from history. That's what it's all about. and see, well, here's a situation that had this class composition and this history. How did it turn out, and what was the steps that socialists took to effectively cause social change, excuse me, my mouth is getting tired, or not. And, what can we learn from that and then apply it to another situation? That's what's scientific about it. So, Oit says, global flows of capital are so different today than they were in the aftermath of World War II. I don't think there's any possibility of the U.S. returning to social democracy. So that is a great point. Capital is way more globalized now than it was before. Entirely different situation. And to be honest, I need to do major catching up on that. So that is a very good point. And Charmander says, and this might be like the last or second to last comment, I'm sorry I don't have any book recommendations for Maoism. I'm very interested in it myself, but Maoists seem so split. I don't know where to start. I've been ML for about 2 years and need to start looking into Maoism. I think it's at least important to understand. I mean, I think that some of the criticisms of Maoism being somewhat ultra-left in some of their positions are accurate. I also think that there's a lot of energy and enthusiasm there that I think some of the Maoist criticisms are also accurate and may be entirely appropriate in some circumstances. I was talking about this in the last stream. For example, Maoists in India seem to be fairly effective, but there are also some like known pitfalls of some Maoist approaches, and people just need to be up on this before wholeheartedly adopting, I think any one of these strategies. I don't think I'll hold off on saying that, but I think where we're at this point is, especially in the United States, a lot of these things like there have been attempts at doing more Maoist style insurgency, and it didn't really go that successfully. And the bottom line is that nothing has been as successful as anyone has needed it to be. I think that we all need to just keep an open mind. And I think that that's the state of just international communism, like in general right now. There are some obvious mistakes that we should not be open-minded to, but I do think that there's stagnation, and how do you correct the stagnation? You fix the errors, and then the revolution moves forward again. I think it's it could use some corrections. So, well, thank you also for the stream comments, and I mean, really, the stream has been me reading and responding to comments. You have a great night as well, and I think we're going to leave it there. Thanks to all the 26 people who are in the audience listening right now, as well as the people who will be hearing this on YouTube later. I didn't get great sleep last night, so I hope that this was all pretty good. But I think this was a pretty good discussion, actually, on the whole. Wasn't there Maoist camps out in the Florida swamp somewhere? That is a new one on me. I have not heard that. If anyone knows about the Maoist camps in the Florida swamps, let me know. All right, I will leave 1 minute for any last-minute questions here, if anybody has any, as we got 27 people. And if anybody has anything else they want to say, then do so, or hold your peace for about a week or so. 10. Here's the final countdown. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Can I have the means of production? Sure. And with that, we're going to sign off. So thanks, everybody. This was a lot of fun. S4A on Twitch is closer to becoming affiliate, and then I can upload stuff onto here as a backup, so that is nice and helpful. So Airwaves is going to play one of the new trucker videos on stream tonight. Great. I actually think the last trucker video that I did, that I uploaded yesterday, I'm pretty happy with that. The one thing is, I spent 20 minutes in the beginning kind of dissecting that comment that some people were saying sounded like an infracell posted. I don't know, but I spent a lot of time on that before getting into the trucker thing. That's less general interest, and it's more for people who, follow along. But otherwise, I thought that was a pretty good video myself. All right, heading out, and we'll catch you all in the next stream or the next video, whichever comes first. Probably a video, but you never know.